In this lesson, we will talk about interactions, and I will show you a few really nice things. One question that really regularly pops up on the forum is, how do I make my character interact with something? So how would you make your character move something, or let's say something to respond to its movement, or even touching something? What about the situation when you want to add something to a character like cloth, for example, like pants or maybe armor or something like that, that is really not suitable for cloth simulation? What about those situations? Although most of the time this is really rig dependent and scene dependent, I will show you a few techniques that will point you in the right direction. I will just enable my sock here. You can clearly see it here. It won't win any beauty contest, but it will serve the purpose. So in this case, you obviously can see the problem. And the problem is, if I select my foot controller and maybe lift this heel, you will see that that foot is really going through this sock mesh, and you cannot fix that with simple parenting. Even if, for example, this sock is a child of your foot controller, it really all works fine to somewhat extent when you are moving it. But as soon as you have any kind of deformation or rotation inside the joints, or some sort of movement that is outside of what parent-child relationship can do, you're in big trouble. Most of the time, solution would be to go for the cloth and really have sort of a simulation where this sock would follow this mesh. And of course, that can be done sometimes, but cloth simulations and all other simulations inside Cine 4D and inside any other 3D applications are difficult to control since they tend to simulate. The best, absolutely the best solution here is the new surface deformer in release 12. Surface deformer is really easy to understand. It will deform the surface that it belongs to according to another surface. And that is exactly what we want. So select our sock object, and simply here from the deformers menu, I will hold down the shift key, and this surface deformer will become a child. It's pretty common. All deformers have to be the child of the object they will deform. Now here you can see some sort of settings, and the one that you should really worry about is this surface. You will tell which surface will drive the deformations on this sock, and in this case that surface should be our mesh. So let's drag our leg mesh inside and see what do we have. If we try to do something now, so for example, let's move our controller and see what do we have, and nothing will happen. Nothing will happen simply because we have to initialize the deformer. So if you hit initialize here, this type that is currently set to projection is really what we want, and it works in most cases. This is something related to a mapping of UVs. So let's initialize, and you will see how much memory that consumes, and of course the strength. So let's give it a shot now and simply move our mesh, and here is the magic. This is absolutely top-notch addition in release 12. Let me show you that other things work. For example, this heel lift. You see how that sock will deform with it? That is absolutely fantastic. This would be a nightmare before release 12, and it would involve some heavy espresso and coffee knowledge. So this is a much better solution for, let's say, really things that are not suitable for cloth deformations, like pants, armors, various stiff additions to your mesh. So this is an absolutely beautiful addition. At least I absolutely love this surface deformer. Here are some settings. For example, this proportional. means that the object will really try to keep its volume once it's stretched, and it's much easier to understand if you will be experimenting with it a bit. So that's it for our leg. Let's go to our next interaction. Here we will show another example of what I mean by interaction. Here we have our hand that we rigged, and here we have some sort of nice jello pudding on a plate, and it is really dynamic, and I will show you this. If I press play and move this guy a bit, you will actually see that pudding is moving. I hope you can see that. So it's just a small movement created, something like this. And I've done this with a jiggle deformer, which is really suitable for all that kinds of jiggles. And you can imagine putting it on, let's say, characters' belly or female breast and stuff like that. So it's really, really nice. There is also not so common usage of jiggle deformer. I will show you that. But it also serves the purpose really well in this pudding situation. Okay, so let me just hit my play button so this deformation occurs. We go back, and the only thing that is added to this jiggle deformer outside of these settings here is the vertex map, where we actually control the stiffness with that vertex map, and we covered vertex maps in volume 1. So what do we want to achieve here? Well, you will most certainly want your character to be able to interact with your scene. So let's say that we want this hand to move this plate. And just to keep things simple, we will create a simple movement. So let me just, let's do a movement with a single finger. So I will expand my controls here and simply, let's say, curl all these guys inside. Something like this, and I will just curl this index finger a bit so it really appears straight forward. We collapse that. We'll go to our side view, select the controller, and let's position that to be somewhat somewhere like here would be nice. So let's say we want this finger to be able to push away this plate object. So how do we do that? How do we create those interactions? Most of the people would consider some sort of simulation, once again, where you would create an relationship between those two objects and say to one is the collider and one is also, but that all involves calculations of some sort of a simulation, and that is not really good because, as we said earlier, simulations really take away the control from you. So maybe some object will simulate properly and look nice, but you won't be able to control it 100%. That's the downside of it. So in this case, we want to think outside of the box, and the most promising solution here is to use constraints. So which type of constraint would be suitable for it? If we break this down logically, all we need is that this plate always keeps some sort of a distance from this finger. So if we constrain this plate and tell it to keep at least a minimum distance, well, in this case, not from the surface of the mesh, just enable my joints, but maybe from this joint, actually the result will be when this joint comes really, really near or almost barely touching, the plate will move because the constraint will tell it to. So nothing fancy, but it will do the job. So let's select our plate object and constrain it. So we will give it a constraint tag, and of course in the clamp mode. And our target will be this joint. Okay, so let's find it. That is an index joint. So the last one here, and let's simply drop it on the Just collapse this layer browser. It's really not necessary right now. So let's select the constraint and simply drag that joint here. And watch what happens. You can see that Cinema 4D actually calculated once again the distance from the origin. In this case, that is this axis guy on the plate object and our joint object. So distance between those two guys is exactly this. All that is left to do is to change this mode because currently it is fixed. And if something is fixed, it won't be able to go in minus or plus direction. So it will be fixed as it is right now. So we will say minimum distance. So right now this plate object will try to keep this minimum distance set here from our joint number 4, and the result should be next. If I select my first goal and move it, then actually it will do what it's supposed to do. Okay, so let me undo that. I will stop the animation and I will select this plate object. Make sure we select all of it, all down the hierarchy, and I will freeze the transformation, all of it, so this reset position will actually work. So let's give it a shot once more. So if we select our hand, you can press play if you want, just to see this pudding wobbling. And if we move this, the result will actually be that this hand will move it. Let's go back. There seems to be a slight issue, and probably, yes, I accidentally undid this guy. So let me stop it all. See, we'll solve some problems. Let's go back. Let's set this to minimum, and now it should work as we expected to. So we can really move away our arm, but as soon as it comes to that minimum distance, it will really do its job. So that's one nice little interaction. Let me go back. I can move away my hand, but I also have the ability to reset the position on this plate because I froze the transformation. Just hit play to have this pudding cell where it should be. And let me show you another type of interaction, possibly on this same setup. So let's say you want some sort of a different results. I can really get rid of this constraint or really just disable it here. One thing that I should probably told you also, you can keyframe all these values. So this hand can actually move the plate, so to speak, and if you keyframe this to, let's say, fixed, you will be able to create, for example, a hand that lifts and holds the plate. So to get that kind of interactions, you would have to keyframe these constraints. So let me just disable that constraint because I want to show you something different. And let's, what if you want, for example, what if you want something like this? So if your finger touches the pudding, you want the pudding to react. So you want to create an event into it. So it would be a dynamic thing. So how to do that? Once again, creating really some sort of a simulation, cloth simulation or soft body simulation is really not a good idea since you will lose the flexibility and versatility. In this case, it's once again best to use a deformer, and in this case, a displacer. So let me show you what I mean by that. Here you actually want to tell your pudding and put this displacer after the jiggle. So let's say the deformations will occur after the jiggling, so be aware of that. So in this case, you want this pudding to have an option to displace its own surface. This displacer is really designed to really emulate sub-polygon displacement that you will create in your material, and do that live in the viewport. So if you want to display something really in a linear fashion, you will use a custom shader here and simply a color. So you can see it now bulged out, and it bulged out exactly for the height of 10 centimeters. So let's put it to 5. And I'm showing you all these steps because it will be much more easier to understand what will I do right now. So really nice thing about this deformer, it has a fall off option, and currently it's set to infinite. That means the effect will be always here in all directions 100% without any fall off. What if you change this to, let's say it's a sphere, and you will get here actually the sphere of influence for that deformer. So only when the object is actually encompassed by this fall off, it will work. So let's scale this guy down. Let's say all the way down, approximately, let's say to a size of this joint. And you already guessed I will put this fall off guy as a child of this joint, number 4. So let me do a transfer. I will transfer this fall off guy to this joint number 4. So I will simply drag it inside, hit apply, and it will assume the position and orientation of it. Now what I want to do is actually I want to scale it. So something like this, and maybe pull it just a little bit in this direction, something like this. So hopefully now, I really hope you will be able to see this. If I move my wrist controller, then actually I should get some sort of effect. I won't get any until I create that displacer. That complete setup should follow this joint. So since they're in different hierarchies, I will use a constraint here. So I will constrain it in parent and say that parent of this guy is actually this joint. So position, naturally, we can also enable rotation. It's not really important, but we can do it. And now you can actually see, now I'll just crank up the values a bit. So you see currently the height is 2.15, let's say 5. And you can see now we have an opposite effect. When it comes close, it will bulge out. So just set this guy to negative direction. That means really when you will be moving your wrist ball, it will go inside. This effect is really pronounced, and it's really nice. Okay, something like this. You can control the fall off here, for example, of the function itself. So let's say the fall off would be 100%, so the effect would be much smoother. You can already see this. So always play with the values. So this is a really nice setup. We are poking a pudding. Who would say I would do that in life? That is really interesting. So this is a kind of interaction that you can apply in your setups. Before I show you another type of interaction or setup, let me just show you something that really popped to my mind. Let me reset all that and also reset all these guys. Okay, so we have nice and clean 0 values. Something that will often become a problem is next. How will you scale this complete setup? Imagine a situation where you are possibly provided with 2 different characters, and one is, let's say, 100 times bigger, or let's say you have a complete scene that is on one scale and your hand is simply a giant hand for that scene, or complete arm is too big or too small. How will you scale that? Although it is a really good practice to model and create your setups in scale so they match the final scene they will be used to, sometimes there is really no way around. if you will be scaling this right now, for example, if you put all this into a single null and do a scale, now try to do something with your hand, you will see it really destroys the setup and it's really bad. It destroys the deformation, everything is really becoming crazy. And the only way to scale this is, once again, to put it under a null object. You would have to turn off the skin deformer for your mesh, completely turn it off. And now you have to scale with this object tool, because Cina 4D by default does everything with the model tool, and this object tool is really, let's say, to keep it simple, it will scale the axis of your object also. So select the object tool, now scale this down or upwards, any way you need it, and here under weight tag, select all the joints, in really every single one of them. You can do that by shift selecting the first and the last one, and all the intermediate ones will be selected. And now click on the set bind pose and turn your skin deformer. You can now go to your object, classic model tool, and give it a shot. So now the deformations are kept and pretty much everything works, but the only problem you will encounter, you will have to redo some of the distances here in your constraints, so be aware of that. So some of the functionality will be lost and you will have to redo something, so bear that in mind. Some things cannot be done automatically. Okay, so let me show you a next setup now. So I just briefly skipped the part where I'm actually positioning this arm to show you something. What about the situation where you actually want this hand to deform? You don't want, for example, this hand to deform something. You want the hand to be deformed. So one really quick example of which I could think of is, let's say that if you really put this hand a little bit more down and you actually want this part of the palm, just show it, you want it to slightly deform, since if you put your own hand and you lean it on the table, it will really squash down a bit. You can clearly see that there is rather normal behavior. Just delete this guy. So how do we do that? The easiest solution, once again, is to use deformers. So it's almost all about that, since there is nothing fancy to it, and we could use a deformer we haven't used so far, and this is the squash and stretch guy, because we actually want something to be squashed. And I will set the fall off here to box, so you can actually have a nice object that is really similar to this box object. So just increase that fall off to a maximum. I will scale this to, let's say, some sort of normal size. So just encompass this area. Let's say here it doesn't have to be perfect. This is just a simple example. Okay, so I think this would be pretty fine. I will probably exaggerate that effect to for you to be able to really see that. So what will happen if I, let's say, move my arm just a little bit down? Well, absolutely nothing. And the reason for it simply because we haven't put this deformer as a child of our arm mesh. Be sure to put it at last, okay? Because you can run into some priority problems. And here all we want to set is this factor, and this setting should be better called strength, because that is what it actually is. So let's just double this to, let's say, 200%. So the strength of the squash will be 200%. This squash and stretch deformer has quite a few settings, but they are pretty much easily understandable with what is provided with documentation. So let's now actually give it a shot. Let's move our hand down and our hand will enter the area where that deformer actually does something. So let's give it a shot. You can see clearly how it nicely squashes our hand and it looks really decent. The trick is simply to fake those things. So in this case we are really mimicking this box surface with this deformer guy. Of course you will position that a little bit more precise, so one would think that this table surface, this really basic table, is actually deforming that hand. If you were wondering, here under many deformers and the fall of object, you actually have an object to put a source. And what does that exactly mean? This source can be a spline. It can also be a particle, but in this case the spline would be a little bit more suitable. Then you can actually use any spline you create and sample the distance from that spline to have the actual deformation. That way you can have an actual object that can deform the surface that is coming. And that's about it. As far as interactions are concerned, now I will show you some really unconventional rigging in next lesson.